killed before his dreams could be realized. The alleged assassin, a small-time criminal on the run. Yet to this day, questions still linger and fester, and even some of Dr. King's closest aides believe the full story has yet to be told. We will try. He was an American martyr. A man who broke through the barriers of segregation with the philosophy of nonviolence, only to be shot down by a hidden gunman before his time.
We had to change the world.
40 years later, I walked to the tomb of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. with his longtime friend and aide, Andrew Young.
Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, free at last. I think that's the appropriate thing to put there.
For him, yeah.
Yeah?
From his first days in the civil rights movement, Dr. King lived under the shadow of death. His house bombed in the Montgomery bus boycott. Followers killed in Birmingham and Selma. He was stabbed once in Harlem at a book signing.
When they removed the knife blades, they left a scar in his chest shaped like a cross.
A cross he saw in the mirror each day when he got up.
And he said, every morning when I brush my teeth, I know that this day might be my last. He said, so I'm ready for whatever comes any day of my life.
He joked about death with his inner circle.
He'd always say, they're going to be shooting at me, but one of you guys is going to be jumping in front of the camera and take the bullet for me. And he said, I'll appreciate it, and then I'll preach the best funeral you ever heard, and anybody ever heard. And then he'd start preaching your funeral. He never let us get nervous about it, and I don't think he was nervous about it.
But it was there. It was very real.
Well, it was there particularly from the moment John Kennedy was killed. He just assumed that inevitably, if they could not protect the president, there's no way we could be protected.
This photo was taken in 1966 on an earlier visit to Memphis. At King's side, that's Officer Edward Reddit. On that visit, King stayed in his usual room off the balcony at the Lorraine Motel. Reddit remembers.
We put our bodies around him coming out of that room with Lorraine, and we walked him down those steps with our bodies to make sure that he was covered. Because it is dangerous. If you look at that thing from the balcony, you know, so many areas you can see that's visible. I'm going to get you.
Reddit approached King at breakfast at the Lorraine to tell him it was dangerous.
Why you want to stay in peace? I just like the room. He just laughed all day. I go out, that's okay.
That was 2 years before Dr. King's death. By then, most of his civil rights victories were already behind him. His nonviolent protests brought out the worst in white America. Police dogs and fire hoses in Birmingham in 1963. Alabama state troopers beating back protesters on the bridge in Selma in 1965. And their violence would strike a flint on the nation's conscience.
And we shall overcome.
President Lyndon Johnson pushed through landmark civil rights bills to open up public accommodations to ensure access to voting rights, and signed the laws as Dr. King stood over his shoulder. By the late 1960s, Andrew Young says, King had become exhausted.
We were pretty well worn out. I mean, he'd been going from 55 to 67 without a let-up.
There was a rumor that Dr. King was planning a sabbatical, maybe in India, maybe in Africa. Is that true?
He was thinking about it. That was his dream. It wasn't India, it wasn't Africa. It was really Riverside Church.
The prestigious Riverside Church in New York was looking for a pastor.
He said, that was my ideal. That's what I wanted to be when I grew up.
I speak out against this war.
But that never happened. Instead, this speech at Riverside would become King's moral watershed over Vietnam. By 1966, the U.S. was mired in a war it could not win, and blacks were the losers. Measured as a percentage of adult males, blacks were dying in Vietnam at a rate twice as high as whites.
In order to atone for our sins, and errors in Vietnam, we should take the initiative in bringing a halt to this tragic war.
Everybody attacked him.
What was President Johnson's reaction after the Riverside speech?
Well, after the Riverside speech, I don't think we talked to him anymore.
He was angry.
Yeah.
On that day, April the 4th, 1967, as King spoke at Riverside, he would have exactly 1 year left to live. 3 weeks later, while King was leading an anti-war protest in Massachusetts, 1,000 miles away in Missouri, a small-time criminal named James Earl Ray would escape from prison and start on the course that would bring both men to Memphis on April 4th, 1968.